Doris Day truly hated him more than anyone. That sentence alone feels jarring, almost impossible to reconcile with the image the world held of her for decades. Doris Day was Hollywood's embodiment of warmth, optimism, and sincerity, a woman whose smile seemed to promise safety in a fragile world. So, how does someone like that come to carry a resentment so deep, so enduring, that she never fully let it go? The answer is not jealousy. It is not romance gone wrong. And it is certainly not about sexuality. It is about something far more unsettling, the quiet violence of deception, and what happens when a person is placed inside a lie they never agreed to participate in. Before Hollywood, Doris Day was a dancer with a dream that was violently cut short. A devastating car accident shattered her leg and ended her future on the dance floor, forcing her to rebuild her life from nothing. During that long recovery, she discovered her voice not just as a singer, but as a presence that felt honest, unguarded, and real. Audiences didn't just admire Doris Day, they trusted her. That trust followed her into Hollywood. Unlike many stars of her era, Doris Day was known for her discipline, her boundaries, and her refusal to treat emotions as performance. People who worked with her later recalled that she hated being used as a publicity prop. If she smiled, it was genuine. If she stayed silent, it was deliberate, which is why what came later hurt so deeply. For years, the world celebrated Doris Day and her on-screen partner as the perfect romantic pair, playful, effortless, believable. But behind that carefully maintained illusion, a truth existed that nearly everyone seemed to know, except her. And when that truth finally surfaced, Doris Day did not feel betrayed by what was hidden. She felt betrayed by the fact that she was never asked. This is not a story about hatred in the simple sense. It is a story about consent, about boundaries, and about a woman who refused to forgive a lie she never agreed to live inside. Before Doris Day ever stepped onto a film set or into a recording studio, she imagined a very different future for herself. Born Doris Marianne Kappelhoff on the 3rd of April 1922 in Cincinnati, Ohio, she grew up in a modest, middle-class household during the uncertainty of the Great Depression. Fame was not a childhood expectation. Survival was. And yet, even in those early years, there was an unmistakable energy about her, a restlessness that needed movement, rhythm, expression. Dance became her first language. Long before she learned how to command a microphone or a camera, Doris learned how to speak with her body. She trained relentlessly, not as a hobby, but with the seriousness of someone who believed this was her way out, her way forward. By her teenage years, she was competing locally with a dance partner, winning contests, building a future step by step. This was not a vague dream, it was a plan. Then, in a single moment, that plan was destroyed. A devastating automobile accident shattered her leg, ending her dancing career instantly and permanently. The injury was severe enough that doctors warned she might never dance again, and they were right. For a young woman whose identity had been built around motion, discipline, and physical expression, the loss was not just professional. It was existential. Everything she thought she was working toward vanished overnight. During her long and painful recovery, Doris Day was confined to her home, stripped of the only future she had ever truly imagined. There were no cameras, no applause, no guarantees that anything better would replace what she had lost. This period of forced stillness would shape her more than Hollywood ever could. It was here, in quiet isolation, that she began singing along to the radio not to perform, but to cope. What emerged was something unexpected. Her voice carried warmth without effort, clarity without strain, and emotion without exaggeration. Friends and family noticed immediately. There was nothing theatrical about it, nothing calculated. It sounded honest. Encouraged by those around her, Doris began singing with local bands, slowly rebuilding a sense of purpose she thought she had lost forever. It was during this time that bandleader Barney Rapp suggested she change her surname to Day, inspired by her rendition of the song Day After Day. The name stuck not as a reinvention, but as a quiet transition from one life into another. Doris Day was not chasing fame, she was adapting to survival. What mattered most in this chapter of her life was not the discovery of a new talent, but the lesson it came wrapped in. Dreams could be taken away without warning, and no one asked for permission when that happened. Control was fragile, stability was temporary, and truth, when it existed, was something you held on to tightly because once it was gone, it rarely came back. These early experiences did not harden Doris Day, but they taught her something crucial. When the world takes something from you without consent, you remember the feeling forever. What transformed Doris Day's voice from a private refuge into a public presence was not ambition, but opportunity meeting sincerity. After singing with small local bands, she caught the attention of bandleader Les Brown, one of the most respected figures of the swing era. This was not a dramatic discovery story. There was no sudden reinvention. What Brown heard was something rare, a voice that felt natural, emotionally direct, and unforced. When Doris Day joined Les Brown's orchestra in the mid-1940s, she entered a world shaped by discipline and precision. Big band music demanded timing, restraint, and control. There was no room for artificial emotion, and it was within this structure that Doris Day's voice flourished. She did not overpower the arrangements. She blended into them, giving listeners the sense that she was singing with them, not at them. In 1945, that quality reached millions for the first time with the recording of Sentimental Journey. Released at the end of World War II, the song became an anthem for returning servicemen and their families. It did more than top the charts. It carried reassurance. It carried familiarity. In a moment when the country was exhausted and uncertain, Doris Day's voice felt safe. What mattered was not technical brilliance. It was emotional honesty. Listeners did not hear performance. They heard relief. They heard someone who sounded like she meant every word. Without trying to project authority or glamour, Doris Day became a voice people trusted, a role she never asked for, but one she would carry for the rest of her life. This trust did not come from image-making. It came from consistency. Doris Day did not cultivate mystery or edge. She did not present herself as untouchable. She sounded like someone who belonged to the same world as her audience, sharing the same anxieties and hopes. And because of that, her success felt earned, not manufactured. Long before Hollywood placed her in front of a camera, Doris Day had already been framed as something far more fragile and powerful, a symbol of emotional reliability. And once that trust was established, the cost of losing it would be devastating. Hollywood noticed Doris Day not because she demanded attention, but because the public had already decided who she was. By the late 1940s, her success as a recording artist had made her voice instantly recognizable, not glamorous in a distant way, but familiar, reassuring, and emotionally accessible. When she made her film debut in Romance on the High Seas in 1948, the industry did not attempt to reinvent her. It simply placed a camera in front of what audiences already trusted. From the beginning, Doris Day projected something Hollywood could rarely manufacture: sincerity without effort. She was naturally beautiful, but never intimidating. She smiled easily, but never artificially. Her screen presence suggested competence, warmth, and moral clarity, qualities that allowed audiences to relax in her presence. They did not watch her with suspicion or fascination. They watched her with confidence. Throughout the 1950s, Doris Day became one of the most reliable stars in the industry. She moved fluidly between musical performances, light comedy, and dramatic roles without losing the core of her identity. Even when scripts attempted to confine her to the role of the eternally cheerful girl next door, Doris infused her characters with intelligence and self-respect. She did not play innocence as ignorance. She played it as choice. This distinction mattered. In an era when female characters were often written as decorative or reactive, Doris Day's roles carried quiet authority. She did not need to dominate scenes to control them. Her timing, restraint, and emotional precision gave her characters weight. Audiences sensed that there was a person behind the performance, someone who understood boundaries, responsibility, and consequence. People who worked with her during this period consistently described the same qualities. She arrived prepared, she followed rules, she expected honesty, she did not blur professional lines, and she had little tolerance for deception. These traits earned her respect, but they also set her apart in an industry comfortable with illusion. Doris Day did not treat emotion as a costume, and she did not confuse charm with permission. By the time she reached the height of her fame, Doris Day had become more than a movie star. She had become a moral reference point. The public believed in her not because she promised perfection, but because she embodied reliability. And once Hollywood realized how much that trust was worth, it began to build stories around it, stories that looked effortless on screen, but would later demand a very real price. By the mid-1950s, Doris Day no longer needed to prove that she could carry a film. What remained uncertain was whether Hollywood would allow her to be taken seriously beyond charm and reassurance. She answered that question decisively in Love Me or Leave Me in 1955, portraying the troubled singer Ruth Etting. The role demanded emotional intensity, vulnerability, and restraint qualities that cut sharply against the industry's preferred image of her. Doris Day delivered all of them without compromise. The performance surprised critics and unsettled expectations. For the first time, audiences saw anger, ambition, and pain emerge beneath the familiar warmth. Doris Day did not abandon her moral clarity. She deepened it. The film proved that her sincerity was not a limitation. It was a foundation strong enough to carry darkness without collapsing into melodrama. Hollywood could no longer dismiss her as lightweight. That credibility followed her into one of the most significant moments of her career. In 1956, Alfred Hitchcock cast Doris Day in The Man Who Knew Too Much. Known for precision and control, Hitchcock rarely tolerated emotional excess. Yet he trusted Doris Day with one of the film's most unforgettable sequences. When she sang Que Sera, Sarah, the moment transcended plot. It became a declaration of acceptance, not passive resignation, but calm acknowledgement of uncertainty. The song resonated far beyond the film. It won an Academy Award and became inseparable from Doris Day's public identity. But its meaning was often misunderstood. Whatever will be sounded gentle, even comforting. In reality, it reflected something harder, earned an understanding that control has limits and dignity lies in how one responds when choice is taken away. For Doris Day, that message was not a performance, it was lived experience. Those who worked with her during this period recalled how seriously she guarded her boundaries. She followed rules not out of submission, but out of principle. She respected structure because it protected honesty, and when she sensed manipulation, emotional or professional, she withdrew rather than perform compliance. This period marked the quiet peak of her authority. Doris Day had proven she could navigate drama, suspense, and vulnerability without sacrificing integrity. She had shown Hollywood that warmth did not mean weakness, and that discipline could coexist with empathy. Yet this very reliability, this refusal to blur truth for convenience, would soon be used as the foundation for an illusion far larger than any single role. Behind Doris Day's image of stability and optimism, her private life followed a far more turbulent path. Long before the public associated her with romantic comedies and light-hearted charm, she had already learned that intimacy could be dangerous. Her first marriage came heartbreakingly early. In 1941, still very young and just beginning her professional ascent, Doris married musician Al Jordan. What began as romance quickly deteriorated into fear. The marriage was marked by physical abuse and emotional volatility. Doris later acknowledged that she lived under constant tension, trying to manage someone else's instability while protecting herself and, eventually, her child. Their son, Terry, became the center of her emotional universe, the one relationship she guarded without compromise. Ending the marriage in 1943 was not a career move. It was an act of survival. Doris chose safety and dignity over the appearance of domestic harmony. Her second marriage, to saxophonist George Weidler in 1946, offered the promise of normalcy. But as Doris Day's career accelerated, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. Fame altered expectations, power dynamics, and emotional availability. By 1949, the marriage quietly dissolved, leaving Doris once again to reconcile professional success with personal instability. The most consequential relationship of her life began in 1951 when she married Martin Melcher. This union blurred personal and professional boundaries in ways that would define her future. Melcher adopted her son, managed her career, and produced many of her most successful films. From the outside, it appeared to be a partnership built on trust and shared ambition. In reality, it was a relationship shaped by control. For 17 years, Doris Day lived inside a structure where decisions were often made on her behalf. Financial matters were handled without transparency. Authority was centralized. Doris trusted because she had been conditioned to believe that trust was a requirement for stability. Only after Melcher's death in 1968 did the full extent of the financial mismanagement come to light, leaving her stunned by how thoroughly her autonomy had been undermined. These experiences did not turn Doris Day against love, but they taught her a precise lesson. Boundaries matter, silence can be enforced, and when control is framed as protection, the cost is often paid later. By the time her fourth marriage ended in 1981, Doris Day had endured a lifetime of being expected to accommodate, endure, and remain composed even when she was not being told the truth. This was the emotional conditioning she carried with her into every professional relationship that followed. She was not naive. She was vigilant. And when she later discovered that she had once again been placed inside a carefully maintained illusion without her consent, the reaction was not sudden. It was cumulative. By the late 1950s, Doris Day had become the face of romantic optimism in Hollywood. That image reached its peak through her on-screen partnership with Rock Hudson. Together, they defined an era of polished, playful romance, effortless chemistry, light sexual tension, and stories that promised happiness without consequence. Films like Pillow Talk, Lover Come Back, and Send Me No Flowers were carefully constructed fantasies. To audiences, Doris Day and Hudson did not feel like actors. They felt like proof that romance could be witty, safe, and sincere. The studio system encouraged this belief, allowing the line between performance and reality to blur. Behind the scenes, however, the illusion was unevenly shared. Within the industry, rumors and quiet understandings circulated freely. Many people knew, or at least suspected, truths that were never spoken aloud. Doris Day was not part of those conversations. She was expected to play her role convincingly and to trust that what she was living inside was real. This imbalance mattered. Doris Day was not merely acting in romantic stories. She was being used as their moral anchor. Her sincerity made the illusion believable. Her reputation made it profitable. And because she valued honesty so deeply, the deception embedded in that partnership would later cut far deeper than the public ever understood. At the time, she had no reason to question what she was being asked to believe. But the foundation of the fantasy had already been laid, and when it eventually collapsed, it would not fall gently. When the truth finally surfaced, it became clear what Doris Day had never been told. During the years she worked closely with Rock Hudson, she did not know that he was gay. She did not know that the studio system was actively concealing this fact, and she did not know that her on-screen partnership with him was being used to reinforce a carefully constructed public image designed to protect that secrecy. This distinction mattered deeply to her. Doris Day later made it clear that the issue was not Rock Hudson's sexuality, it was the deception surrounding it. Within the industry, many people were aware of the truth, or at least suspected it. Publicists managed it. Executives protected it. The silence was organized. Doris Day was not included. She believed she was participating in honest professional storytelling. Instead, she later realized that she had been positioned as a convincing front, her sincerity lending credibility to a narrative she had never agreed to support. To her, that realization felt humiliating, not because of what had been hidden, but because of who had been allowed to know and who had been deliberately kept in the dark. "I trusted Rock," she later admitted. And that trust, once broken, reshaped how she understood every shared scene, every public smile, and every romantic illusion that had been sold in her name. Doris Day was adamant about one distinction that many people later tried to erase. What hurt her was not Rock Hudson's sexuality. It was the fact that she had been drawn into a deception without her knowledge and without her consent. To her, that difference was not semantic. It was moral. She believed honesty was the foundation of any real partnership, professional or personal. Had she been told the truth, Doris believed she could have made her own decision. She might have chosen discretion. She might have chosen loyalty. What she could not accept was having that choice taken from her entirely. Instead, her image was quietly repurposed. Her sincerity became evidence. Her public reputation became a shield for someone else's secrecy. Doris Day was not simply acting in romantic comedies. She was unknowingly reinforcing a narrative designed to protect the studio's interests. That realization reframed everything she thought she had participated in. Attempts were later made to excuse the deception as how Hollywood worked back then. Doris Day rejected that logic. Industry norms did not override personal ethics. Survival strategies did not cancel the obligation to be honest with the people most directly involved. To her, silence imposed without consent was not protection, it was exploitation. This was why forgiveness was never simple for her. Forgiveness would have required pretending that the process did not matter, that the years of unknowing participation did not carry weight. Doris Day understood something uncomfortable. Harm can exist even when intentions are complicated. Her response was not rooted in naivete or moral rigidity. It was rooted in agency. Doris Day did not demand punishment. She demanded recognition that her trust had been used and that her consent had been treated as optional. Once that line was crossed, the wound was no longer personal, it was principled. As time passed, Doris Day's anger sharpened not into rage, but into judgment. What she came to understand was that Rock Hudson was not the architect of the deception, but he was its most visible beneficiary. He did not design the system of silence. He accepted it, he lived comfortably within it, and he allowed others to carry the moral cost. Hollywood had long perfected the art of protection, not of people, but of investments. Rock Hudson was one of those investments. His image was guarded, managed, and defended at every level. Publicists knew what to say. Executives knew what not to say. Lies were not spontaneous. They were coordinated. Doris Day was never invited into that coordination. Instead, she was positioned as something far more useful: credibility. Her sincerity made the illusion work. Her reputation made it believable. Her presence reassured audiences that what they were watching was safe, authentic, and emotionally honest. In reality, she was being asked to lend her integrity to a narrative that required her silence without ever being given the dignity of choice. This was the imbalance Doris Day could not forgive. Rock Hudson was protected by secrecy. Doris Day was exposed by trust. While he was shielded from consequence, she was left to absorb the emotional fallout. The system did not ask her whether she was willing to participate. It assumed she would. And when the truth emerged years later, the burden of awkwardness, humiliation, and emotional reckoning fell disproportionately on her. To Doris Day, this was not a misunderstanding. It was exploitation. She did not believe Hudson acted out of malice, but she did believe he benefited from a structure that treated her consent as irrelevant. His silence preserved his safety. Her silence preserved the illusion, and when the illusion collapsed, it was her dignity that had already been spent. In that sense, Rock Hudson became more than a person in Doris Day's memory. He became the face of a system that asked women to be accommodating, men to be protected, and truth to be flexible. Her anger was not loud. It did not seek revenge. It simply refused absolution. And that refusal, calm, unwavering, and deeply personal, is what made so many people uncomfortable. When Rock Hudson publicly revealed his AIDS diagnosis in the 1980s, the story shifted overnight. Sympathy flooded in. The narrative softened. Many began to speak of him as a tragic figure, a victim of fear, secrecy, and a cruel era. For Doris Day, this moment introduced a new moral pressure, one she quietly resisted. She felt compassion. That much was never in doubt. Doris Day supported AIDS research and understood the suffering the disease inflicted, not only on Hudson but on countless others abandoned by silence and stigma. But compassion, to her, did not require historical amnesia. What unsettled her was the expectation that tragedy should automatically erase accountability. There was a subtle rewriting at work, an emotional reframing that encouraged forgiveness without reckoning. Doris Day refused to participate in that revision. She did not deny Hudson's pain, but she would not allow it to cancel her own. "I was sorry for him," she said later, but sorrow was not the same as absolution. To forgive would have required pretending the deception never mattered. It would have required minimizing the years she spent unknowingly lending her image, her credibility, and her emotional labor to a lie she never agreed to carry. Doris Day understood something many preferred not to confront. Suffering does not retroactively cleanse harm. Her stance was deeply uncomfortable to the public. It resisted neat moral closure. It refused the easy ending. Hollywood prefers the one where tragedy redeems everything that came before. Doris Day did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize her pain. She simply declined to lie again for the sake of emotional convenience. In doing so, she asserted a difficult truth. Empathy does not demand self-erasure. Compassion does not require silence. And forgiveness, when offered without consent or honesty, becomes just another performance. What ultimately unsettled the public was not the original deception, but Doris Day's refusal to resolve it in a way that made others comfortable. Audiences were used to seeing her as kind, optimistic, and endlessly forgiving. They were not prepared for a woman who held her ground. When she did not soften her stance, especially after Rock Hudson's illness, her response was quickly reframed. Words like bitterness and hatred began to circulate, not because Doris Day expressed rage, but because she declined reconciliation. Her boundaries disrupted a cultural expectation that women should absorb harm quietly, then release it for the sake of emotional closure. Rather than argue, Doris Day chose silence. But this was not retreat. It was judgment. She withdrew from Hollywood, declined interviews that sought to romanticize the past, and refused to revisit films that no longer reflected her truth. By stepping away, she denied the industry what it valued most: her participation in nostalgia. She would not lend her presence to stories that minimized what she had endured. This silence was strategic. In an industry built on constant performance, her refusal to perform forgiveness became an act of control. She did not defend herself repeatedly. She did not soften the truth. She simply reclaimed authority over her story. In her later years, Doris Day regained something that had been taken from her repeatedly throughout her life: agency. Control over her time, her emotional obligations, and her legacy. What remained was not anger, but self-possession, a quiet, resolute clarity that required no applause. Doris Day's final decision was not made on a movie set or in front of an audience. It was made quietly, on her own terms. She asked for no funeral, no grave marker, and no public memorial. No final spectacle. No symbolic reconciliation. No performance for comfort. It was, in many ways, the most consistent act of her life. After decades of having her image shaped, managed, and used by others, Doris Day chose how her story would end. She stepped away from illusion and left behind what could not be controlled: the truth. Not a polished legacy, but an honest one. Hollywood may remember her as eternal sunshine, but history remembers something more complicated and more powerful: a woman who understood the cost of silence and who chose, at the end, to speak through restraint. Doris Day did not hate easily. What she refused was erasure, and in that refusal, she claimed the one thing the system could never take from her: the final word. If this story changed how you see Doris Day, or how you see Hollywood itself, take a moment to reflect on it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you believe these stories deserve to be told without illusion. And join us as we continue to revisit Hollywood not as it wanted to be seen, but as it truly was.